History Center. Tonight, we're pleased to have James Tanner presenting on beginning research in the United Kingdom. And James is currently the chairman of the board of the Family History Guide Association and is a longtime genealogist, frequent presenter for BYU Family History Library, for MyHeritage, and quite a few other opportunities. He has spoken at RootsTech, is an ambassador there. So we're looking forward to having James present. We'll have everyone muted this evening so that you can ask questions. We'll reserve a bit of time at the end for Q&A. And this recording, this class will be recorded, so you'll be able to view the recording on the Sandy Granite Family History website. That's granitefhc.com within a few days of the presentation. Okay, so with that, we'll turn it over to James. Thanks.
Okay, nice to be here. Great opportunity. I was mentioning just a moment ago that it's unusual to talk about the United Kingdom as a genealogical entity of such, or whatever you want to call it. Normally, at least traditionally, I guess, we examine English records and Scottish records and Welsh records and all the others, and truly one of the issues here is that they're mostly all about the same records since they've been around together since the 1600s. So there's not a whole lot of difference between the records. The main differences, of course, are regional as far as the language. Traditional Scottish is Gaelic, and in Wales is Welsh, and they're basically bilingual countries, but traditional English is English, I guess, so that you don't have too far to go. But if you go far enough back, of course, you get back into Middle English, which is considerably different. Well, let's get going here. Just to straighten out the names, Great Britain is the name of the island, and it's the home to England, Scotland, and Wales. So we have that when you talk about Great Britain, that's that portion. The United Kingdom is politically designated over time, and it's the union of the countries on the island of Great Britain along with Northern Ireland. That's the current configuration of the United Kingdom. But depending on the time period, the United Kingdom either had 2, 3, or 4 separate countries, and the records are they're not exactly the same, but they're all quite similar. And since the early 1500s, 1538 to be exact, when Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church, most of the records in the United Kingdom have been kept by the Church of England. However, there's still a significant Catholic population. I had a chance to look that up. There's millions of Catholics still in England, and so Ireland, of course, is a very Catholic country, and so there's just you have to realize that there are other kinds of records besides the English, the Church of England records. I thought that would be helpful to understand the research strategy, how you go about starting to do research in England. This can apply to almost any country, and I think that it's important that you understand that genealogy is genealogy. Finding the records is always the objective. Using the records to discover families becomes only after you've identified valuable records and have them accessible where you can get to look through those records. And as far as genealogists are concerned, we love the fact it's the great age, the new age of genealogy is the vast amount of records that are being put online digitally. But we also recognize that there's still a significant number of records out there that are not online. And that'll come up here as we talk about the records, as I talk about the records in the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, and Wales. And Northern Ireland. First of all, it's the first step I would take myself, and this is what I do, and this is what I suggest everyone does, is I would sit down and learn about the countries. Before I started digging for, Uncle George up in Lancashire or someplace, I would find out what the history was, what the country was, how it was situated in the world and politically and economically at the time that my ancestors were there. Get a kind of a basic understanding of how the history of the country has proceeded. You can find any number of histories online if you just simply do a little Google searching, put in history United Kingdom, history England, history of Scotland, or whatever. And you'll find out that it's very complicated history. Most of what's surprising about history is that it can be boiled down to quite a very, very few timeline things that are really important. But overall, if you start getting into detail, there's just more and more and more detail. But as genealogists, we do need to understand the basic history, because that affects not only the availability of the records that we're going to be searching for, but it will also determine the type of records which may have been available during different time periods. Obviously, the things that you need to know to begin to identify an individual are a name, a date, and a specific location for some event in that person's life. So actually, we should turn that around, and we should say the first thing you do is identify the location of where the events occurred. The event, if you're looking at events, can be anything from birth to death and anything in between. As long as we can fasten down an individual to a specific location, then we have a fairly good chance of finding the records, first of all, and secondly, of making sure that we're identifying the correct person. We often talk about Scandinavian records being difficult for the standpoint that there's so many people with the same name. Believe me, in England, there are so many people with the same name. It's not unusual for me to find 1,000 people, hundreds of people with the same, almost exactly the same name in almost the same location, and depending on the time period. And so it's very, very important that you keep focused on the location where the events occurred. Next is, when you do find that location, go to Google Maps and look for the place and get an idea of where it's situated and what the surrounding communities are. It's going to be extremely helpful for you to be able to follow families that live in these little towns throughout England and Scotland and Wales. If you don't know all of the little names of all the towns surrounding towns, you may miss getting the right person because perhaps they got married 5 miles away from their original location, or 6 or 10 miles. And you also need to understand where the main areas of commerce, where the market cities were, where people would go if there was a market, because that may be the place where they meet someone who is a potential spouse. So when you get on Google Maps, it's really interesting to do the Street View. The Street View helps you in a number of different ways. If you're not familiar with Street View, it's a little icon down in the lower right-hand corner of the maps on Google, and go to googlemaps.google.com. And when you get there, you pull out that little icon, drop them down on a blue line, and that gives you the Street View. Well, it's pretty impressive. Everybody should have used it at some point in time. And it's very helpful in England because you can drive around in those little towns and look at the actual places where your ancestor may have lived, and also identify the churches that are close to and available. That will help you to sort out the parishes, meaning the geographical locations within the church where records were kept. Then look for the records in each of the large online database websites. We have a lot of nearsightedness, and people get focused on one or two of the big websites. I know people who are on Family Search, and they say, and when you say, well, are you aware of Find My Past? And they say, well, yeah, I know it's out there, but I've never really looked at it. Well, the problem here is that we have 4 big websites, and then there are a number of others in that are based in the United Kingdom that are that have millions and millions of records, and they're not necessarily duplicative. And you really do need to become familiar with all of those particular websites. The big ones that will have these records are Family Search, Ancestry, and Find My Past. And then as kind of a backup and with additional search capabilities is MyHeritage. They don't have nearly the number of records in the United Kingdom as the other 3 do, but there are also some big websites that I'll talk about as we go through this presentation. And then it's very important that you enter all the information that you find into the Family Search family tree. Why is that? Because you do not want to spend a great deal of time duplicating your efforts. A lot of times people view the family tree as being a place where people make changes, and it's not reliable because you can't know, somebody might come along and change your information. The answer to that is basically management of the situation that goes on in the family tree. Changes are going to come, but the assumption underlying that concern is that all changes are bad. Well, the answer is, in a lot of cases, is all changes are not bad, and many times you'll find out that people are entering data and attaching sources and adding to the information in the family tree in a big way. And that's benefiting you because you don't have to do that research over again. You don't have to keep doing it over and over. You can have other people in your family that you're related to who will be involved in doing that particular work. And then go back and review this all and add in all the record hints that you receive. All of these big programs out there that I've just mentioned have record hints, and they're different types of record hints, but they all add and connect you to sources for people. Not all of them are reliable. It's not necessarily the case that every record hint is correct, and you do have to review and evaluate every record hint that you receive. But when you get those record hints, that gives you a leg up. What I've been finding most recently with Family Search, Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Find My Past is that the record hints are way ahead of me. I can use those record hints constantly to get a foothold in areas where very little or no research has been done previously. And the last thing is just repeat. We go back through it because it's a constant learning process. Every time I put together one of these presentations, or any time that I'm speaking about a subject, teaching a class or whatever, I learn more about the subject that I'm looking at. Here's a few important dates. I'm not going to belabor this. We'll just run through them quite quickly. Very interesting. The first and earliest, what we could call genuine genealogical record is called the Domesday Book. And there's been some question about its pronunciation. And I looked it up today, and there are 2 pronunciations, and they're not very close, either Domesday or Doomsday. But what it is doesn't have anything to do with end of the world. This is a book about taxation. In 1085, shortly after the Norman conquest of England in 1066, they simply wanted to know who was out there that they could levy taxes on. So they put it out and compiled a tax list. So it's really one of the earliest records we have of people who were in in the Great Britain island. The first printed book is 1477. The reason why these dates are important to genealogists is because they're like the end of the world, where you're going to drop off into the void. When you get back into the 1400s or 1500s, you are basically out of the business of doing research like you would think research is done through genealogy. You are looking at medieval and very difficult to read manuscripts. And it becomes a whole new challenge of learning what essentially is a whole new writing system and a whole new language, in a sense, not just in a sense, but a real new language. The Union, so what we call Great Britain begins with the Act of Union in 1536, which joined England and Wales, and where the prince in England became the prince, the King of England became the Prince of Wales, the successor to the Welsh throne. So it was a joinder of the king of the monarchies that created that. 1538 is the big number I've already mentioned. It's where not King Henry directly, but he was the one who instigated the requirement that the parishes in the country keep records. Not all of them started to do that immediately, and it wasn't until Queen Elizabeth came along and said, well, if you don't keep records, we're going to chop off your heads, or whatever we do this week, hang you or whatever. And so they started keeping records, but more consistently. But this is really another drop off the end of the world date, because beyond that, there are very, very few parish records. And so you must rely on probate records and other kinds of records that are not as easily read, easily used, and don't have as much information. 1547, King Henry VIII became King of Ireland. Need to understand that that made Ireland part of England in a sense. And so when you're talking about Irish records, from 1547 up until 1922, when Ireland became the Irish Free State, we have basically their records are as much in England as they are in Ireland. So you need to start kind of reorienting the way you do Irish research to know that part of it, at least, is British research. The Kingdom of Great Britain established when the Kingdom of England and Wales joined Scotland. So that became Great Britain because it covered all of the country that was on the island. And then 1801, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And that made them even more integrated between the country. That did not mean that there wasn't a lot of resistance in Ireland, because from approximately the 1500s till even till quite recently, there's still a great deal of friction, and there has been almost constant warfare. In 1822, there was the Irish independence. Excuse me, that should be 1922. And in 1837 began the beginning of the civil registration. That's important because that's a date when we get a lot more records. And then 1841 was the first complete census of England, Scotland, and Wales. 45 to 52 is in here because that's the Irish potato famine, where millions of the Irish immigrated, and over 1 million people left Ireland. Very small country, by the way, but 1 million people left Ireland and went out to the United States and to Canada and to other places in the world. You can identify the county and the parishes. This is the map of England with the counties. one thing that you need to know about the counties is that the names sometimes have changed in the past, and the area, the boundaries of the counties have changed. The most recent change was in the 1970s, when many of the names of the counties were redone and also the boundaries were changed. And so current boundary maps of England don't apply. So we need to go back to look at some historical maps to see exactly where those boundaries. There is a very, very good English county map on Family Search, and we'll come up and show you a little bit about that in a minute. The first place, I can't say enough about the Family History Guide. I'm sure that folks here have heard about it, but there is a United Kingdom section in the Family History Guide, and you can begin your exploration of each of the countries in step-by-step instructions on the free program. So this is it's a really good place to start. I, as a matter of fact, use the Family History Guide as an outline to keep me focused on doing my presentations on any particular country. So if I'm the one I'm working on presently is Iceland, and it gives me a good outline of all the topics I need to cover in Icelandic history and Icelandic record sets. So it's just it's just a marvelous tool, and it gets better every day. Can't say enough. Here's again the Family History Guide when you go to a specific country, in this case, England, and also you can go down and drill down and see records for each of the counties and in all the different types of records that are available. And the little lightning bolts are quick links that will take you directly to records. That means down at the bottom of the page, there's a long list of records that you can go directly to, linked from the Family History Guide. Here's some of the larger websites. I've already mentioned Family Search, which is free. Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Find My Past are Family Search partners, and they are available free to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of the Family Search partnership. The other websites here are to some extent paywall, meaning they are subscription or paywall sites, meaning you can usually buy a smaller increment of time if you wish to do so, but it's obviously more expensive than if you have a membership in the particular website. The National Library of Ireland has many records which are free, and the Archives of Wales also has a lot of free records. Scotland's People is the main record site for Scotland, and it is a pay-per-view site in a sense. You have to buy the records. There's one thing important that I kind of alluded to earlier, and that is that in all of these countries, in Great Britain and the United Kingdom over the years, the nobility, the king, the throne has what's called the royal copyright. And what that means is that they claim ownership to all of the records created by the crown, by the government. And the issue there then becomes, which records do they allow you to see and which records can you copy without paying? And the answer to that is the bulk of the marriage and birth registration records and things in the original copies that are other than indexes are generally only available through paying for a digital copy or for having them mail you a paper copy. And I don't know if they're still mailing paper copies during the pandemic, probably not in any quantity. So the last amount I heard was about £6 per document. So it's not cheap, and it is a process. And there are dedicated genealogists like my daughter and her husband probably have spent thousands and thousands of dollars obtaining records one by one from the British government. One of the great resources is the FamilySearch.org Research Wiki. And you can begin by putting in the name of the country with the word genealogy. That's how they're all classified now. And if you look at this page, this is all of the blue on that page are links out to either separate topics or to resources or to places. They have interactive maps where you can click on the county and go to the county records lists and all of the explanations. The Research Wiki has gone through quite a bit of transformation in the last couple of years. It started back in about 2008 and quickly grew very large into tens of thousands of articles from all over the world. It then topped out at about 75 to 80,000 articles and sat for a number of years, just seemingly not really being actively pursued. But in the last couple of years, it started to grow again, and a lot of really, really up-to-date, interesting information has been put in the wiki. It's a marvelous source. Go to the FamilySearch.org website, click on the search tab, and it's the last entry at the bottom of the drop-down menu. This is a clickable map. This shows you the England 1851 map program on FamilySearch. It's a little bit difficult to find. You can find it by typing in maps.familysearch.org, but the easiest way to find it is to use Google. And it's turning out to be almost the easiest way to find anything on the FamilySearch website is to use Google. And so just put in England 1851 map on FamilySearch or FamilySearch and England 1851, and it'll give you the link to an interactive map on FamilySearch that gives you a tremendous amount of information. Here's the address is actually maps.familysearch.org, if you can remember that. And here is, once you click on that, then you get then you zoom in and can see all the parishes and all the boundaries of all the parishes. Very helpful. This is how they were back in 1851, but it's highly representative of the way that the country looked for many years before that and for many years after that until the most recent changes. Parishes haven't changed much. Some of the parishes have divided because of population changes and things like that, new churches being built. But primarily there's not a lot of movement, so they're still extremely valuable going back into 1851. And it will tell you the list of all the parishes in a county, as to all the counties contiguous to the York County, in this case Kent. Search the Family History Library catalog, search the FamilySearch Research Wiki, and you can also get out of it by removing your selection. Okay, so before 1837, if you were to divide the United Kingdom, all of the countries, into two different categories of records, you would do those records before 1837 and the records after 1837. And the reasons that the records are dividing at that date is because that's when the government began to have civil registration. Now, civil registration is the governmental equivalent of the information that was being kept in the parishes. It doesn't hurt genealogists' all feelings at all to have two different sets of records that cover the same information, because if one is missing, it's possible the other one has recorded it. And it's just sort of and once you get to this golden period of time after 1837 in these countries, finding and identifying specific ancestors becomes much easier than it is before 1837, when all you can rely on are the parish registers. Now, there's a number, we mentioned the large online websites, but if you're into doing a lot of research in England and you're finding out that you're not getting a lot of good source information and things from the big websites, and you kind of run out of gas on Family Search and Find My Past and Ancestry, then you really need to get acquainted with these specific British websites. There's a lot of genealogical activity going on in England and Scotland and Wales and in Ireland. And there's lots of people interested, and there's lots of records that are not in the channel of those big online websites. Not to say these websites don't have a lot of information, but they are extremely valuable. This one is the parishregister.co.uk, and that will give you a lot of records on and searching in the parish registers. So this is just a way of getting into these records by using the local websites. Here are the basic record sets for the United Kingdom. And I considered putting these up with bullet points and coming down through them, but I think what we just need to do is kind of have an overlook at all of the records at one time, rather than having them appear individually. That always is a little bit, well, it'd be helpful in some cases, but I didn't think that it would work too well here. So you can see they divide into three major kinds of records at the top. Basically, civil registration records, census records, and church records are the ones that you'll most likely see. And those remembering that parish registers, the Church of England mirrored the Catholic Church, although they split on some doctrinal issues. They didn't split too far from the organization of the Catholic Church. So the Church of England is fairly closely organized the same way as the Catholic Church. And the basic unit was a parish. Parish has a priest, a parish priest, and a parish is focused around a church, the parish church. Sometimes there are more than one. There's more than one church in a parish, meaning church building. One of the buildings is the parish church, and the other buildings are the churches. They may be places where they go. Not all of them kept records, and sometimes the records, most of the time, the records were only kept in the main parish church, but they basically collected them all the records that were done. Sometimes the priest, because of the number of people who were actively involved in the church, would travel from parish church to parish church. So you'll have the impact of that occurs is that the records were not kept at or near of the time of the baptism, marriage, or death records. They are burial records, but they would then be they would write down all that, keep notes, and then come back and transcribe it into the book. So sometimes that can cause some problems sometimes with the dates and the consistency of things, of when things happened. So you can't always expect that the records were written about the time that the particular baptism or marriage or burial occurred. It's a little interesting thing about parish registers is that we have very, very few records of births. Unless the priest was very consistently careful, not very many of the births in England and Scotland and Wales have been recorded. what is recorded is the christening, and there's sort of an assumption that the christening took place shortly after uh, the child was born. Well, yes and no. Yes, there was a lot of reason why the child could have been christened shortly after birth, the religious beliefs, because of the religious beliefs, but it didn't always happen. And in some cases, for example, I found English records where the entire family was baptized at the same time. All 6 or so children had the exact same christening date. Now, how would that happen? Well, a couple of examples of why you may end up having that sort of situation is that let's suppose that for whatever reason, person was not baptized as a child. Perhaps parents didn't believe, were nonconformist and didn't believe that the child needed to be baptized in the Church of England, and had him baptized as a Baptist or a Methodist or a Presbyterian or whatever. Oh, and you have to remember also on top of this, as long as I brought up Presbyterians, is that the primary church in Scotland is the Presbyterian Church. So rather than the Church of England. So what could happen is that a couple came to get married, and the priest said, I don't have any record of you being baptized, either one of you, or the husband or the wife or whatever. And then there could be a situation where they insisted that the person be baptized before they would perform the marriage. In other situations, which happened with my particular family, is that my families were, most of my all that I found so far were very, very poor. And in one case, they were subject to a decision by the parishes to provide transportation out of the county, out of the country, to go to Australia. So in other words, instead of taking care of the poor, they shipped them off to Australia. I don't know how happy the people were to have that happen, but my people were apparently nonconformist, meaning they belonged to either the Baptists or the Methodists, and we don't know which. And they all got baptized. The requirement before they left to go to Australia was they all had to be baptized. So they all got baptized at the same time. And then they all end up being shipped off to Australia. So understanding also that marriages are the key record set here in England and all the other countries surrounding. There's no question that you need to start looking for marriages. Marriages affected property rights. Marriages affected merged families. Marriages had more political implications and commercial implications. And so they're the records that usually survive. Birth records, sometimes. Death records, once again, death records are almost non-existent. The fact that a person died was not the important event. It was the burial in the churchyard or in the cemetery or out of the cemetery, as that case may be. As one of my ancestors who had been lost to a family, it turned out that in a lot of research later, we found his burial record, which was marked out of cemetery because he was not a baptized member of the church. Okay, and so then there's other records of property records and probate records and poor law records and migration records. These are all records that you need to become familiar with. And they will help you survive. They will help you answer questions, but you probably aren't going to get to those records until you begin to get some really difficult circumstances. It's very interesting. It's very rewarding to do research in England, Scotland, and Wales, and in Northern Ireland. Ireland and Northern Ireland are a different kind of area. There's a long history there, and the records sets are more scattered, and it makes it more difficult. But from the standpoint of being able to document people clear back into the 1700s, it's just really it's a challenge. Sometimes it can be almost maddening. You can start pulling your hair out, what you have left of it if you're me, but it's still very rewarding to do research because there are records, and they're mostly available. This is the census years. The original censuses started in the early 1800s, but they were simply counts. They just counted how many people were in certain areas. And so the first real useful for genealogical purpose census is in 1841. That makes it a little bit earlier than the United States Census that became useful in 1850. And so it does get into an area where you do get people who show up in the 1841 census who were born in the 1700s. So it does let you get back into the 1700s. And then the last census every 10 years to 1911. And it's important to understand that the 1921 census will be released in 2022 next year. And Find My Past already has the contract from the country, from the Crown, to do to index and publish the census records in 2022. I'm sure that shortly after Find My Past has that there will be other contracts let to the other major websites. The Scottish censuses also begin in 1841, no coincidence, and to 1911, no coincidence. Northern Ireland's records, most of the Irish census records in Northern Ireland before 1861 were destroyed in the Irish Civil War in 1922. So that involved the record office in going to have a block there in Northern Ireland blowing up because that's where they were storing ammunition, and it got set off and destroyed a significant part of the records. There are parts of the census that are still available. So fragments from the 1821, 31, and 51 censuses are available for some of the counties in Northern Ireland. You can find a lot of information. This is what I would recommend before you start digging into the English census, because there's some quirks about the census that you might not understand. Is sometimes, for example, in some of the census years, some of the census records, the age of the people was recorded, only it was rounded down, so or up. Or so a person who was, say, 35 years old in the census may show up as being marked as 30 years old in the census. So that can be significant kinds of things that you need to know about the British censuses. And before you get too involved in it, you might want to look at the National Archives on there. When they talk about the National Archives, it's .gov.uk. Don't get confused with the National Archives in the United States. So a lot of times you'll be reading along and it'll say, and in the National Archives, and you'll start to think about it. Well, what's the record doing in Washington? Well, it's not. It's in the National Archives in England. So you can go here to this and look up census records. And the simplest way to do it is to put National Archives, UK census, and then it'll take you into all these records. And to read this, because it will give you all of the different, some of the salient features that you need to know about how and when and where these records were kept. And this is what you'll deal with most ultimately if you continue to do research in England, Scotland, Wales, or whatever. you'll go to their general register offices, the GROs. And the GRO is the place where you order the certificates and pay your money. And you can do some searches, but you can't get a copy of the records without the cost and sending it. They're very good and very helpful records. There's just sort of a constant cost there. There is also a Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It's called PRONI, and it's the official archive for Northern Ireland. One of the projects that have been going on now for some years with the Public Record Office is to reconstruct the records that were lost back in 1922 during the Civil War. And so a lot of work has been done to provide alternate records for doing research. And you should be getting into and becoming familiar, if you have any ancestors in Northern Ireland, with the Public Record Office. Now, working around it's fairly easy to get lost in the records in the places in England. And when I mentioned initially about the importance of location, if I said to you that I had a family where I found that in early 1800s, in 1800, and they lived in Georgia, and the mother, and they have a child listed who was born in Massachusetts. Would you think that that was logical? Would you think, well, maybe that's not the case? What was the mother doing way up there in Massachusetts? Well, that brings up the first rule of genealogy. The first rule of genealogy is that when the baby was born, the mother was there. Okay, so when the baby was born, the mother was there. The father may not have been there, but the mother was there. And so when you have a mother that appears to live in a place like Georgia and the baby's born in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, probably not the baby that belongs in that family. And that would be a highly unusual situation. Well, when we live here in the United States, there's not a lot of people that would know if I said, well, the mother was living in Middlesex and the baby was born in Leicester. No, that's the same problem depending on the time period. And in 1800, that would have been very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Travel was not possible between those 2 points any more than it would be to travel easily between the southern part of the United States and the northern part of the United States. So learning about the geography of the country and where all of these things are and how far apart they are extremely important. And this is a topographical dictionary of England. It gives you history online, and it gives you all sorts of information about the locations in the country. On 3 different occasions, at least, the British government did what were called what were military maps of the country. They got down to the part of showing every house and hedgerow, and those maps are also available in England. Some of you may be related or have traditions in your family that you're related to nobility and or royalty. And there are a number of websites out there that are set forth all of the interconnected families. This is one of the better websites. It's extremely detailed, and there is, in fact, there are a lot of resources, including on Family Search in the genealogies section under the search, and it comes up and says genealogies. Part of that includes all of the royal houses of Europe. And so if you start searching in there by the names of your royal ancestors, you'll often find small family trees showing relationships. This is called Philimore's Atlas and Index of Parish Registers, and it's updated periodically. And it's now on Ancestry for searching on Ancestry. But there are also maps, and this will get you into some digital copies of those maps here. And what the importance of Phillimore is that it tells you specifically the earliest records that are in existence in the parish, in each of the parishes of England. So if you really need to know what the drop off the world into the world date is for your parish that you're doing research in, you should be aware of Philimore's, because that will take you into finding out where all of those end dates are. This is another one. There's a lot of efforts, local efforts in England and in UK to put all of the birth, marriage, and death records online. And this is often called the parish clerk's website. And what it is some of the parish clerks who have become a little more commercially minded, you might say, than others, have banded together to publish a lot of their records online. Mostly they are transcribed or collected or indexed, and there's still an undercurrent of having to charge for any actual copies of the original records. So a lot of times if you're doing an extensive amount of research, you can do like one of my daughters and her husband did, and that is just went to England and went to the parish and gave them a donation enough for them to sit there and photograph the entire parish registers that they needed. So it's just possible that that could happen. This is another huge website. It's called The Genealogist. It's the kind of the basic website for all of the people getting together to do genealogy, and they have a huge number. This is a subscription website, and depending on your the amount of research you're doing in England and whether or not you're being you're getting too frustrated for words, you may very well want to get into this to get some nonconformist and non-parochial records and a lot of records clear back into the 1100s. So these are the kinds of things that are out there, and not necessarily things that you would see. And there are a lot of other sources. There just are. They're just every parish, there's libraries, there's archives, there's just about anything you can imagine out there of records that if you just keep searching, the more you search online, the more records you're going to find. You may recognize this if you watch any of the murder mystery shows on television and you've watched either Morse or Endeavor or some of the other ones that are based in Oxford, or go or travel to Oxford, and this is Oxford University over there. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and let's see if we have any questions. Has everybody put everybody to sleep?
I'm still awake.